High Observer Nexus stood aboard the observation deck of the ZK Thrax vessel, his crystalline exoskeleton refracting the pale Earth sunlight into prismatic patterns across the sterile walls. His secondary arms twitched with barely contained amusement as he reviewed the preliminary reports on human military capabilities. Behind him, war strategist Vyra K maintained a more reserved posture, her sensor arrays quietly collecting data on the planet below. Projectile weapons, Nexus chittered, the universal translator converting his clicks into standard galactic basic. Chemical propellants and metallic armor. They're barely beyond throwing rocks at each other. He turned to address the assembled delegation of the ZK Thrax Confederation's Military Assessment Division. Still, protocol demands we complete the evaluation. The ZK Thrax ship had arrived 3 standard cycles ago, part of the Galactic Council's initiative to assess potential member species. Earth had achieved faster-than-light travel 2 years prior, triggering the automatic review process. Military capability assessment was merely a formality, or so they thought. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Rodriguez stood at parade rest on the landing pad, watching the alien shuttle descend through Earth's atmosphere. The iridescent craft seemed to bend light around itself, a display of technology that made Earth's most advanced stealth systems look like crude camouflage paint. Yet Rodriguez's expression remained impassive, years of special operations training having taught him the value of appearing unimpressed. "They're here to observe training exercise Crimson Dawn," he briefed his staff. "Let's show them exactly what humanity is capable of." The slight smile that crossed his face would have worried anyone who knew him well. The alien delegation emerged from their shuttle like a collection of living gemstones, their crystalline bodies catching the morning sun. High Observer Nexus approached Rodriguez, towering nearly 9 feet tall, his primary eyes fixing on the human with what seemed like mild curiosity. "Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez," the alien's translator processed. "We look forward to observing your training methods." The slight pause before training carried an unmistakable tone of condescension. "This way, High Observer," Rodriguez gestured toward the training grounds. "We've prepared a comprehensive demonstration of our basic training protocols." The first exercise was already underway when they reached the observation point. Below them, in the pre-dawn gloom, 200 recruits were completing their morning routine. They moved through the obstacle course with practiced precision, bodies covered in mud and sweat. "They're not using any environmental protection?" War strategist Vyra K asked, her sensor arrays extending in surprise. "This is just the warm-up," Rodriguez replied casually. "We believe in training as we fight. Environmental suits can fail. Our soldiers need to function without them." The aliens watched as the recruits transitioned seamlessly from the obstacle course to hand-to-hand combat training. The sound of impact echoed across the field as partners traded blows, each hit delivered with controlled force. "They're damaging each other," Nexus observed, his crystalline structure vibrating with concern. "This is permitted?" "Controlled damage builds resistance," Rodriguez explained. "In real combat, you fight through the pain. Better to learn that lesson here than on the battlefield." The morning progressed, and the aliens' initial amusement turned to increasing disquiet. They watched as soldiers practiced equipment failure scenarios, completing complex missions with deliberately sabotaged gear. They observed underwater survival training where recruits were subjected to simulated drowning conditions, learning to function through the panic. "But why?" asked a junior observer, their crystalline form clouded with confusion. "Why not simply ensure the equipment doesn't fail? Why not prevent these conditions entirely?" Rodriguez's response was measured, practiced. "Because in real combat, anything that can go wrong, will go wrong. We don't train for perfect conditions. We train for reality." The afternoon brought special weapons training. The crack of gunfire echoed across the range as soldiers demonstrated rapid adaptation to different weapon systems. When a rifle jammed, the shooter smoothly transitioned to a sidearm without breaking stride. When ammunition ran dry, they switched to hand-to-hand combat without hesitation. High Observer Nexus's initial amusement had completely faded. His primary eyes tracked every movement, his sensor arrays extended to full capacity. "Your soldiers," he began, choosing his words carefully, "they appear to almost welcome the challenges." "Adversity is the best teacher," Rodriguez replied. "Every failure is a lesson. Every obstacle is an opportunity." As the sun began to set, the delegation watched the final exercise of the day. In the fading light, soldiers moved through a complex urban warfare scenario. Buildings erupted in controlled detonations, communication systems were deliberately scrambled, and simulated casualties tested the unit's ability to adapt and overcome. "And this," Nexus's translator struggled to process his agitated clicks, "this is truly your basic training?" Rodriguez allowed himself another small smile. "Basic training, yes. Would you like to observe our advanced courses tomorrow?" War strategist Vira K's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been fear. Her sensor arrays retracted slightly as she processed the implications. These humans didn't just train for warfare, they trained for chaos itself. They didn't just prepare for failure, they embraced it, learned from it, grew stronger from it. As the alien delegation returned to their shuttle that evening, High Observer Nexus found himself composing a very different report than the one he had anticipated. The humans weren't primitive at all. They were something far more dangerous, they were adaptable. In his private quarters aboard the ship, Nexus reviewed the day's footage again. The images of humans pushing through pain, adapting to failure, and thriving in chaos played on repeat. His final report would need careful wording. How does one explain to the Galactic Council that they hadn't found a primitive species in need of guidance, but rather a race of beings who had turned survival itself into an art form? The observation mission was just beginning, but already one thing was clear: the ZK Thrax Confederation's understanding of warfare would never be the same. Dawn broke over the Arctic training facility, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of blood and gold. High Observer Nexus's crystalline form vibrated against the cold as he watched Captain Junwei's elite demonstration unit prepare for their morning exercise. The temperature read -40°C, conditions that would cause most spacefaring species to seek immediate shelter. The humans were wearing what they called light winter gear. Today's demonstration will focus on survival and adaptation in extreme environments, Captain Wei explained, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. His team stood at attention behind him, 12 men and women chosen specifically for this demonstration. "We believe that any environment can become a weapon, either for you or against you." War strategist Vira K's sensor arrays extended fully, recording every detail. "Your species considers this training necessary? Surely modern combat takes place in controlled environments?" Wei's laugh echoed across the frozen landscape. "With respect, war strategist, nothing in combat is controlled. The environment is often your first and deadliest enemy." The demonstration began with what the humans called ice immersion training. Vira K's crystalline structure nearly shattered in shock as she watched soldiers deliberately break through the ice and submerge themselves in the freezing water. Instead of immediately seeking rescue, they calmly executed survival protocols, pulling themselves out using ice picks and quickly establishing emergency shelters. "The human body temperature is dropping dangerously," one of the junior observers noted, their sensors indicating the biological changes in the soldiers. Yet they continue to function. "Cold is a state of mind," Wei stated matter-of-factly. "Pain is information. Discomfort is temporary. These are the mantras we live by." The morning progressed into what the humans called stress inoculation training. The soldiers were subjected to a series of increasingly challenging scenarios: limited visibility, equipment failures, simulated injuries, and tactical problems that required immediate solutions. High Observer Nexus watched as one soldier, operating with a deliberately damaged environmental suit, constructed an emergency shelter from raw materials while maintaining tactical awareness of her surroundings. "This one appears to be enjoying the challenge," he noted, unable to keep the disbelief from his translated voice. Sergeant First Class Helena Volkov, Wei identified her. "She holds our unit record for survival in extreme conditions. 72 hours in simulated Siberian winter with nothing but a knife and her training." The afternoon brought what the humans called adaptive combat scenarios. The demonstration unit was divided into teams and given seemingly impossible objectives. Their equipment was intentionally sabotaged, their communications were jammed, and their intelligence was deliberately flawed. Nexus watched in growing unease as the soldiers not only adapted but thrived under these conditions. They created makeshift tools from damaged equipment, developed new combat strategies on the fly, and turned the harsh environment itself into a weapon. "Your soldiers," war strategist Vira K began, her crystalline form shimmering with what might have been fear, "they appear to become more effective as conditions deteriorate." "Chaos is the only constant in combat," Wei responded. "We don't just train our soldiers to survive it, we train them to weaponize it." The demonstration reached its climax with what the humans called a multi-system failure scenario. The entire unit was tasked with completing a complex mission while simulating total equipment failure. Their heating systems were disabled, their weapons were reduced to their most basic functions, and their communication devices were rendered useless. The aliens watched in stunned silence as the humans moved through the challenge with practiced precision. They used hand signals and pre-arranged protocols to coordinate their movements. When standard weapons failed, they improvised alternatives. When traditional tactics proved impossible, they created new ones. "This is not merely training for combat," Vira K observed, her sensor arrays tracking every movement. "This is evolution in action." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow, Captain Wei gathered his unit for a final demonstration. The soldiers, despite hours in the brutal cold, showed no signs of fatigue. If anything, they seemed more focused, more determined. "For our final exercise," Wei announced, "we'll demonstrate our emergency extraction protocols. No equipment, no support, no communications. Just human ingenuity against the elements." What followed would haunt the alien observers for cycles to come. The unit, working with nothing but basic tools and their training, constructed an emergency landing zone in the middle of the frozen wasteland. They used the ice and snow to create signals visible from orbit, established a defensive perimeter using natural formations, and maintained combat readiness despite their exhaustion. "Your species," High Observer Nexus finally spoke, his crystalline form dim with realization, "you don't just train for survival. You train to turn survival itself into a weapon." Wei's smile was tight, professional. "High Observer, survival isn't just about enduring. It's about adapting, evolving, and ultimately prevailing. Every environment, every challenge, every failure is just another tool in our arsenal." As the alien delegation prepared to return to their vessel, war strategist Vira K approached Captain Wei privately. "There is something that concerns me," she began, her translator struggling to convey the complexity of her emotions. "Your soldiers, they smiled during the worst challenges. They seem to find satisfaction in conditions that should break them." Wei's response was simple but carried weight that would take the alien strategist cycles to fully comprehend. "That's because we understand something fundamental about human nature, war strategist. We don't just survive adversity, we grow stronger from it. Every challenge we overcome makes us better prepared for the next one." Aboard their ship that night, High Observer Nexus reviewed the day's observations with growing concern. The humans hadn't just adapted to their harsh world, they had learned to turn every aspect of it into a training ground. They didn't just accept the possibility of failure, they intentionally sought it out, learned from it, mastered it. His report to the Confederation would require careful consideration. How does one explain that they had discovered a species that had turned the very concept of survival into a military art form? A species that didn't just endure chaos, they thrived in it. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beneath the afternoon sun, its cracked earth radiating heat like a forge. War strategist Vira K's crystalline form had been specially treated to withstand the extreme temperature, yet she still felt uncomfortable. The humans, however, moved through the burning landscape as if it were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Major Olivia Blackwood stood before the alien delegation, her desert camouflage blending seamlessly with the harsh environment. Today's demonstration focuses on psychological warfare and resistance training, she announced, her voice carrying the weight of experience. We believe the mind is both our greatest weapon and our most vulnerable target. High Observer Nexus's primary eyes narrowed. Psychological warfare? We were under the impression this was a combat training facility. All warfare is psychological, High Observer, Blackwood responded. The physical aspects are merely the delivery system. The demonstration began with what the humans called stress resistance training. Soldiers were subjected to carefully calculated psychological pressures while attempting to complete complex missions. Sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, and information warfare were all tools in this elaborate training scenario. Notice how they maintain unit cohesion, Blackwood pointed out as a team navigated through a maze of obstacles while being subjected to disorienting sound frequencies. They're not just resisting individually, they're supporting each other through the challenge. War strategist Vira K's sensors detected subtle changes in the soldiers' biochemistry, elevated stress hormones, increased neural activity, yet their performance remained remarkably stable. They appear to be adapting to the psychological stress rather than merely enduring it, she observed. Exactly, Blackwood confirmed. We don't train our soldiers to ignore stress, we train them to harness it. The afternoon brought what the humans called cognitive battlefield exercises. Teams were presented with complex tactical problems while under extreme psychological pressure. Their intelligence was deliberately corrupted, their assumptions were challenged, and their decision-making processes were constantly tested. Commander Ramirez, leading one of the teams, demonstrated this principle in action. Under the effects of sleep deprivation and in the midst of contradictory intelligence, he successfully led his unit through a complex hostage rescue scenario. The aliens watched in fascination as the humans seemed to become more innovative as their challenges mounted. Your soldiers, Nexus began, his crystalline structure vibrating with concern, they appear to be developing new strategies even while under extreme duress. That's the point, Blackwood explained. Anyone can follow a plan when everything goes right. We train our people to think creatively when everything goes wrong. The demonstration continued with what the humans termed psychological resilience scenarios. Soldiers were subjected to simulated capture situations, forced to resist interrogation while maintaining their mission objectives. The aliens watched as the humans not only resisted the psychological pressure but often turned it back on their interrogators. This goes beyond mere training, war strategist Vira K noted, her sensor arrays fully extended. You're teaching them to weaponize their own psychological responses. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert landscape, Major Blackwood introduced the final exercise of the day. We call this the breaking point protocol, she explained. It's designed to push our soldiers beyond what they believe they're capable of. What followed was a demonstration that would haunt the alien observers for cycles to come. The soldiers were subjected to a combination of physical exhaustion, psychological stress, and tactical challenges that seemed impossible to overcome. Yet not only did they persist, they excelled. Lieutenant Grace Chen's team particularly stood out. Under conditions that should have shattered their morale, they not only completed their mission but also adapted their tactics to account for new challenges as they arose. The aliens watched in stunned silence as the humans turned their very exhaustion into a tactical advantage, using their apparent weakness to lull simulated enemies into a false sense of security. Your species, High Observer Nexus finally spoke, his voice carrying a new note of respect. You don't just train to resist breaking. You train to become stronger at the breaking point. That's the secret, High Observer, Blackwood responded. There is no breaking point, only breakthrough points. As the alien delegation prepared to depart, war strategist Vira K approached Major Blackwood privately. There is something that disturbs me, she admitted. Your soldiers, they seem to find clarity in chaos, strength in exhaustion. It defies logical understanding. Blackwood's response was measured but carried a weight that made Vira K's crystalline form shiver. That's because we understand something fundamental about human nature, war strategist. Our greatest strengths don't emerge in comfort, they emerge in adversity. Every challenge we face, every obstacle we overcome, every limit we push past, it all serves to make us stronger, more adaptable, more dangerous. Later that night, aboard their vessel, High Observer Nexus and war strategist Vira K reviewed their findings in private. The implications were becoming increasingly clear, and increasingly concerning. They don't just train their bodies, Vira K noted, her form dimming with worry. They train their minds to turn adversity into advantage. Every weakness becomes a strength, every challenge becomes an opportunity. Nexus's response was slow, deliberate. We came here expecting to find primitive warriors. Instead, we found something far more dangerous, a species that has turned evolution itself into a tactical doctrine. His report to the Confederation that night was brief but urgent. Human psychological warfare capabilities exceed all known parameters. They have developed methods to weaponize the very concept of adversity. Recommendation: reassess all previous assumptions about human military potential. As the Earth turned beneath them, casting shadows across the desert training grounds, the aliens began to understand a fundamental truth about humanity. They hadn't just survived their harsh world, they had learned to turn every challenge, every hardship, every moment of adversity into a weapon in their arsenal. And that, perhaps, was the most terrifying revelation of all. Archive Master Drell's crystalline form pulsed with increasing agitation as he processed the historical records before him. The United Nations Military History Archive in Geneva stretched around him, its vast database terminals humming quietly in the climate-controlled environment. Behind him, High Observer Nexus and war strategist Vira K watched as centuries of human warfare flickered across the holographic displays. This cannot be accurate, Drell's translator clicked rapidly. These records suggest that humans have fought more wars against themselves than most species have fought in total. Colonel Diana Frost, the archive's military liaison, stood calmly beside the alien historian. Every conflict taught us something new. Each war forced us to adapt, to innovate, to overcome. The displays showed battles across millennia, from ancient formations to modern warfare. Humans fighting in burning deserts, frozen wastelands, dense jungles, and endless oceans. The scope was staggering. But the casualties, Drell's form flickered with distress. The losses in these conflicts made us stronger, Frost finished. Each loss taught us resilience. Each defeat forced us to evolve. Their historical review was interrupted by an urgent message. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez appeared on the main screen. High Observer, war strategist, you're needed at the Joint Operations Center. The combined exercises are about to begin. Minutes later, they stood in the heart of the Global Military Coordination Center, watching as forces from 20 nations prepared for a joint training operation. The scale was unlike anything they'd witnessed in their previous observations. Today's exercise simulates a full-scale planetary defense scenario, Rodriguez explained. Multiple nations, multiple military branches, all working in concert. The aliens watched as the exercise unfolded. Naval vessels from different nations coordinated seamlessly in the Pacific. Air forces from historically antagonistic countries flew in perfect formation. Ground forces from diverse cultures operated as a single unit. These nations, Vira K observed, her sensors tracking the complex movements. Our records indicate they were enemies less than a century ago. We learned that our differences made us stronger, Rodriguez replied. Different tactics, different perspectives, different approaches, all combining to create something greater than the sum of its parts. The exercise intensified. Communications were deliberately disrupted. Power grids were simulated to fail. Entire regions were theoretically rendered uninhabitable. Yet the human forces adapted, compensated, evolved. Commander Jackson's multinational task force particularly caught the aliens' attention. When their primary communication systems failed, they seamlessly switched to backup protocols that bridged language barriers. When standard tactics proved ineffective, they combined different military traditions to create new approaches. Notice how they're not just cooperating, Frost pointed out. They're innovating in real time, combining their diverse military histories to create new strategies. High Observer Nexus's crystalline structure vibrated with growing comprehension. Each human military force brings its own strengths, its own history of adaptation. Exactly, Rodriguez confirmed. Chinese strategic thinking, Russian winter warfare expertise, Brazilian jungle combat techniques, American technological innovation, all working together, all learning from each other. The afternoon brought what the humans called cascade failure scenarios. Multiple systems were deliberately sabotaged, forcing the combined forces to adapt rapidly. The aliens watched in amazement as human military units from different continents seamlessly compensated for each other's weaknesses. Your species, Archive Master Drell spoke, his form pulsing with revelation, you haven't just preserved your military history, you've synthesized it. Every conflict, every adaptation, every innovation has been retained and built upon. We believe in learning from everything, Frost responded. Every victory, every defeat, every stalemate, it's all part of our collective military knowledge. As the exercise reached its climax, the aliens witnessed something unprecedented. When faced with a seemingly impossible tactical situation, the combined human forces didn't just overcome it, they transformed it into an advantage. Units from different nations improvised new tactics on the fly, combining centuries of diverse military traditions into something entirely new. This goes beyond mere military cooperation, war strategist Vira K observed, her sensors struggling to process the complexity of the human responses. You've turned your entire history of conflict into a foundation for innovation. Later that evening, in a secure briefing room, Archive Master Drell presented his findings to the alien delegation. The holographic displays showed the progression of human warfare across millennia, each conflict building upon the lessons of the last. We've been fundamentally wrong in our assessment, Drell announced, his crystalline form pulsing with urgency. We saw their wars as primitive conflicts. Instead, they were crucibles of innovation. Each battle, each war, each conflict forced them to adapt, to evolve, to become stronger. High Observer Nexus stood silently, watching as human forces continued their exercises on the monitors around them. They don't just learn from victory, he finally spoke. They learn from everything. Every defeat makes them stronger. Every challenge makes them more adaptable. And now they're combining all of that knowledge, all of that experience, Vira K added, her form dimming with the weight of realization. Every human military force brings centuries of unique adaptations, all working together, all learning from each other. That night, as Earth's lights twinkled below their orbiting vessel, High Observer Nexus composed what might be his most important report yet. Human military capability cannot be measured by their technology alone. Their true strength lies in their ability to learn, to adapt, to combine diverse military traditions into something greater. They haven't just survived their violent history, they've turned it into a foundation for continuous evolution. As he sent the report, Nexus watched the continued exercises below. Humans from nations that had once been bitter enemies now fought side by side, sharing knowledge, combining strengths, creating something new. And perhaps that, he realized, was the most remarkable thing about humans: they didn't just learn from adversity, they learned from each other. The United Nations Space Command headquarters in Geneva hummed with tension as High Observer Nexus prepared to deliver his final assessment to both the Galactic Council and Earth's military leadership. His crystalline form caught the morning light, casting prismatic patterns across the chamber's walls. Behind him, war strategist Vira K and archive master Drell stood in silent support, their own forms dimmed with the weight of their discoveries. "We came here to evaluate a primitive species," Nexus began, his translator processing the complex harmonics of his native speech. "We are leaving having discovered something far more significant." The assembled human military leaders sat quietly, their faces impassive. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez and Captain Wei exchanged subtle glances. Major Blackwood's expression remained carefully neutral, though her posture spoke of quiet confidence. "In 5 cycles of observation," Nexus continued, "we have witnessed training methods that defy our understanding of military doctrine. We have seen soldiers who don't just endure adversity, they thrive in it. We have observed commanders who turn chaos into advantage, and units that become stronger as conditions deteriorate." The holographic displays activated, showing scenes from their observations: soldiers training in Arctic conditions, teams adapting to psychological warfare scenarios, multinational forces operating in perfect synchronization. "Your species," Nexus's form pulsed with emphasis, "has developed something unprecedented in the known galaxy. You haven't just learned to fight, you've learned to evolve through conflict itself." General Eleanor Harrison, Earth's Chief of Combined Military Operations, leaned forward. "And how does the Confederation view this discovery, High Observer?" Nexus's response was measured, each word carefully chosen. "Initially, with fear. Your capacity for adaptation, your ability to turn any situation to your advantage, your willingness to embrace pain and hardship as teachers, these traits make you formidable potential adversaries." The chamber grew still, the tension palpable. Decades of science fiction had prepared humanity for this moment, the moment when a technologically superior alien race might declare them a threat. But Nexus wasn't finished. "However, we have also observed something equally remarkable. Your ability to transform former enemies into allies. Your willingness to share knowledge, to learn from each other, to combine diverse military traditions into something greater." War strategist Vira K stepped forward, her sensors extending. "Your species possesses a unique duality. You train for war with an intensity that terrifies us, yet you demonstrate a remarkable capacity for cooperation and unity." Archive Master Drell added his own observations, his crystalline form brightening. "Your historical records show a species that has grown stronger through conflict, yet has learned to channel that strength into defense rather than conquest. Which brings us to our final assessment," Nexus announced. The chamber fell silent as both human and alien observers waited for his verdict. "The ZK Thrax Confederation recommends Earth for immediate military alliance status within the Galactic Council." The response was immediate. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the human delegation. Even the normally stoic Rodriguez allowed a slight smile. "Furthermore," Nexus continued, "we recommend the establishment of a joint training initiative. Your methods, while sometimes terrifying to us, offer invaluable lessons. In return, we can provide technological insights that might complement your natural adaptability." General Harrison stood, her presence commanding attention. "High Observer, your recommendation is both unexpected and welcome. But I must ask, what changed your perspective from fear to alliance?" Nexus's form shifted, creating a cascade of light. "We realized something fundamental about your species. You don't just train soldiers, you forge survivors. You don't just teach combat, you teach evolution. In a galaxy full of unknown threats, such capabilities are not to be feared, but to be valued." The formal proceedings concluded with the signing of preliminary alliance protocols, but the real moment of understanding came afterward, in a more private setting. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez found himself sharing a quiet conversation with High Observer Nexus in the facility's observation deck, watching as human and alien forces began their first joint training exercise below. "You know," Rodriguez said, watching a human instructor teaching a group of crystalline aliens about Arctic survival techniques, "when you first arrived, we were just as concerned about your assessment as you were about our capabilities." Nexus's form pulsed with what might have been amusement. "Because you thought we might see you as a threat? Because we thought you might not understand why we train the way we do," Rodriguez corrected. "Why we push so hard, why we embrace adversity, why we turn pain into teaching." "We understand now," Nexus replied, watching as another group of humans learned to operate ZK Thrax energy weapons, adapting quickly to the alien technology. "Your strength isn't in your weapons or your technology. It's in your perpetual drive to become something more than you are." As the sun set over the training grounds, casting long shadows across the facility, human and alien forces continued their joint exercises. The scene below was a testament to an unexpected truth, that sometimes the most powerful alliances are forged not through fear or dominance, but through mutual respect and the recognition of complementary strengths. High Observer Nexus's final report to the Confederation contained a single, simple addendum: "In seeking to evaluate humanity's military capability, we have instead discovered partners in evolution. Their methods may seem harsh, their training extreme, but they have developed something invaluable, the ability to turn adversity itself into advantage. In allying with them, we gain not just military partners, but teachers in the art of perpetual adaptation." The stars wheeled overhead as Earth's first joint human-alien military exercise continued through the night, a preview of a future where humanity's unique approach to warfare and survival would help reshape the military doctrine of an entire galaxy. The aliens had come seeking to evaluate a primitive species. They were leaving having found something far more valuable: partners who had turned evolution itself into an art form.